Mexico. And this leads me to another question, maybe to touch on the U.S. as well, because you've talked about the security situation in the U.S. I think broadly, a lot of us are seeing across the world, across the board, a collapsing economy, increased wars all over the world, increasing social unrest, political revolutions, especially recently we've been seeing in Africa. And I believe this is also going to lead to increased crime, not just in Mexico, but in many countries. I'm starting to get that sense that in the U.S. we're seeing increased crime. What are your thoughts there in the U.S.?
I travel across the United States. I'm in a different state every week, basically. I think I've seen more of the United States than most Americans, which is a surreal thing to kind of say because I'm probably 3 or 4 years into my American dream, but I've seen more of it than most Americans. And I've seen California, and I've seen Detroit, I've seen Chicago, and I've seen Seattle, I've seen some of the parts of it that are, oblivious and or programmed to think that not here, places like Texas. Texas talks a big game about who they are and what they're not about and stuff like that. But Texas is going the way of California pretty soon, in my opinion. So you see a weird shift in the United States and the clear division. Everybody's either, Democrat or Republican. Most people don't realize this, but most Mexicans are very conservative in their politics. Most Mexicans, at least the ones from my generation, are. Why? We grew up Catholic. We grew up under, family nucleus is still intact. But we were made the enemy by the last president that the United States had. We were made the bad guys. We were made the antagonists. I think that was a shot in the foot, not only for that presidency, but also for the country as a whole. The wall on that board, the wall that they built, the fence that they built is a joke. People calling for the border to be closed down are completely ignorant and oblivious about the fact that we both depend on each other in a ginormous way. The United States is dependent on Mexican consumers. We are the second largest consumer of American products there is, Also, every single kitchen I've visited in the United States that is of any quality has Mexicans working in it, and I'm willing to bet that not all of them are there legally. During the COVID epidemic, we had produce in the aisles. You didn't have any toilet paper, but you had produce and some market stock goods there that were picked by illegal immigrants. Think about that. During COVID, we had essential workers in the form of illegal immigrants. If you take out every illegal immigrant in another country and send them back to where they're from, as some Americans like screaming, the country would collapse immediately. I think it's about time the United States wakes up to that fact and to realize it has a dependency on the young country of Mexico. When I say young, Mexico has a giant resource that the United States doesn't have. A working class that is young, that is willing to work. A lot of people want to talk about oil and lithium. Mexico has strong, young, working people that are willing to work. The United States does not have a lot of that. Yeah, we need each other more than we even think and imagine. But politics has divided us and vilified certain aspects of the culture on both sides. I think, main thing I'm realizing just by being on both sides of the border is how we really need each other. Border Patrol, most of the Border Patrol agents that I've trained, because I've trained Border Patrol and Homeland Security agents, which is surreal for me as an immigrant, but I have. I've trained Border Patrol, BORTAC guys, border trackers on basically the latest and greatest of cartel methodologies. And you see in them, there's a bunch of Latinos in those groups, And it's funny because they get labeled the most racist organization, federal organization out there, and most of these guys are Latino, like first generation. So they get vilified too, but they're doing a job. Then you go on. Then you go and to see some of these protest lines, and they're, throwing rocks at customs and immigration, and sending supplies down and donations down to some migrant camps in Tijuana, for example. And those donations are being sold in open air markets all over Tijuana to make money for people that don't even give that money back to the people that stuff was for, and they use it to fund more people being brought up from South America to then be crossed by people smugglers across the border. So these virtue signaling people trying to stick it to the man by sending donations out to that migrant camp are actually funding people smuggling, and that is clear to anybody that cares to look at it. And basically, I think the U.S. as a whole has a big conflict in the soul, and Mexico as well. We need each other more than we think.
Yeah, I would totally agree, and I always stress nuance on the podcast. And I don't really like to play the left-right game. I kind of step outside it, and I think people need to visit both countries. And I remember my first job when I was 15. Legally, you're allowed to work I'm from Chicago, and so I got a job at a supermarket. Happy Foods doesn't exist anymore, but we had mostly migrants, Irish, Italian, Puerto Rican, but the biggest portion of the workforce were Mexicans, and I had a great time with them. Hard workers. Probably some of them were not legal. I have no idea. But in any case, and it goes to what you're saying, that in Mexico, there's a lot of people willing to work, even if the wage is not that high. And I just don't see that in the U.S. and with the youth. And as you say, I totally agree. The U.S. would collapse if Mexicans were pulled out.
Don't get me wrong. Like, when it comes to politics, like, people assume things about me sometimes when they see what I talk about. I want to smoke a joint at my gay best friend's wedding and have a gun on me and just be left alone. Those are my politics. I think most Mexicans would kind of agree on some of these politics. As long as it doesn't concern me, it's fine. But there's a militancy out there. They're trying to make it about us versus them, which is pretty interesting to kind of see. I mean, I am a permanent resident of the United States. I'm not a citizen yet. I'm working towards that. I can't vote. I can pay taxes though, and that's pretty painful. But I could see some of the elements, and just everybody wants to have a side. Mexico doesn't get a lot of things right, but at least we've had several political parties in power over the past few decades. There has been a change of power, at least that way. We have a federal voting card, and nobody thinks it's racist, across the board. But it's interesting to see that identity politic thing in the United States, and how it's almost like a blanket that people cover themselves in.
And speaking of identity, this leads me to my next question. And I over the last 2 years, because of what's going on with the pandemic, I've been getting emails, calls from people from all parts of the world looking to flee to Mexico. I've met some of the listeners who even came down and have purchased property here in Mexico and in different parts of Mexico. And so and I've thought about this all my life. Someone kind of like yourself as a nomad. I've lived in half a dozen countries, and I've moved around the U.S. and back and forth to Croatia and everywhere else. And I'm an American who left for Mexico. Many Mexicans, such as yourself, leave for America. Many Mexicans prefer staying in Mexico. And sometimes I even think about going back to the U.S. And I think you left Mexico for the U.S. And it seems people from all walks find happiness in both worlds.